Pour ceux qui étaient au Douglas Hall l'année dernière, on a reçu Amy Halloran comme conférencière pour notre deuxième année. Et en fait, elle avait amené avec elle un pledge pour le Flower Ambassador Pledge. Et comme on est un événement bilingue cette année, enfin, j'ai pris la liberté de traduire le pledge de Amy. Donc, traduction libre. Et je vais faire comme Amy nous avait fait faire l'année dernière. Donc, je vais vous demander de vous lever et de placer une main sur le cœur et de répéter après moi. You have to stand up. You have to go like this. Yes. Right? We're all in this together. Alors, je jure solennellement et avec joie que je dirai à tous ceux que je croise que c'est bien d'aimer la farine. Le pain n'est pas poison. C'est l'invisibilité qu'il est. Je vais tenter de rendre visible tout le travail dans le pain, de la semence au moulin, du moulin à la table. Les moulins sont les leviers dont les fermiers ont besoin pour mettre plus de grains en terre et sur nos tables et sous notre beurre. Parce que le beurre est bon et le pain est notre mémoire, il est temps de remettre nos portraits de famille sur le manteau de la cheminée et retrouver notre familiarité avec le grain et la farine. Merci.
Thank you for indulging my goofy pledge to flour. My name is Amy Halloran, and I invented that. I don't know how much I'm repeating of Dominique because I took off the translation phones, but I invented that when I was the keynote at the Kneading Conference a couple of years ago. And I wanted to point all the attention I could to the importance of small mills and being a lever to give growers to do something different. Because as I met fresh flour, you know, I was an obsessed home baker, and then I met fresh flour in my 40s, and I couldn't believe that I had never met this food before. And so I wrote a book about all the pioneers who are doing tremendous things to expose this grain and help all of us bear witness to the transformation that's possible in our daily bread. And I really want to be able for everyone to see. It's in localizing food, it's a little bit challenging to see all the processes back to the field. You can meet your tomato maker, but it's a little bit harder to have a connection from you to your baker to the miller to the field and farmer. And those visibilities they used to be common. And we are making them common again with all kinds of work here. I'm very excited to be a part of this third edition of A Taste for Grain. And this particular moment of it, to get to pull out Dawn Woodward's story of grain and have her tell her past and present and future, which is really exciting. So, Dawn, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and how about let's start at the very beginning of your connection to bread. Your first job as a baker, I think, is a good place to start.
Sure. So I had been line cooking in New Orleans, and the typical female story of my generation was all the sexual harassment and all the male bro BS. So I found refuge in the pastry kitchen. So started doing that. Didn't love the restaurant lifestyle, so took some time off. I took a baking class at the Culinary Institute of America. I met Dan Leader. I said, "Can I come to your bakery?" He said, "You're hired." They were really desperate. Went there, and within 6 months, I became their head baker. And I have to say, bread. So this is in the 90s, and Bread Alone was using whole grain flour, not local, obviously, but coming from a lot from Heartland Mills. All the breads were made with a stiff whole grain levain. So that was sort of an intro into, flour as flavor. And then with my cooking background, it made sense that this is the flour needs to have flavor. And then I met some German brothers at a conference in Paris. And again, a lovely case of sexism and misogyny. They could not believe I was a baker. So they said, "Come to our bakery and show us." So I took them up on it, went to the bakery, taught them how to make a baguette, and they taught me how to make rye bread, and that just completely changed how I baked, because the Germans have it down with whole grains and phenomenal. It's such a bread culture, right? There was bread everywhere, rolls, pretzels, and those rye loaves, I just lived on rye bread and beer. And so that was the start of it. And then it's just kind of grown from there, and my interest in local food, and they've just sort of all come together.
Right, in a beautiful way, and come together as the culture has come around toward an interest in your interests.
Yes, thank God.
Right? But talk about the beginning of Evelyn's Crackers and why you decided to make all the choices that you did.
So my husband and I immigrated to Toronto after the birth of our daughter for some political reasons and then just lifestyle choices. So Toronto had a really great, this is 11 years ago, Toronto had a really very good farmers market scene, and we knew we wanted to be part of it. I had already been making crackers for some catering he and I were doing, and so I took the crackers around to the market managers. We got into what turned out to be two of the best farmers markets in the city. Complete stroke of luck. Nobody was doing whole grains, and then a very dear friend of mine, Naomi Duguid, introduced me to Red Fife, grown by a friend of hers, and I was like, what is this? This is amazing. So that changed the cracker game for us. And then my husband and I feel if we're going to be part of the farmers markets, then we better use local ingredients. Because I didn't understand how there could be a bread maker at the farmers market using conventional white flour. So there we go. I've said it. I don't use it. And it's from then on. And at that time, we could source Red Fife, spelt, and buckwheat, only whole grain, only stone milled, and certified organic. And it was a huge learning curve, but we're like, this is what we have to do, right? We are part of the local food scene. This flour has amazing flavor. Let's figure out how to use it.
But this was an imperative of your own. It was not
Absolutely.
A rule. And sometimes a farmer's market will regulate where the ingredients come from.
Yep.
Not so often for bakers.
It doesn't. I'm dying to get a program started in Toronto that will force bakers to use local whole grain flour. Mm-hmm. Because why else would you be there?
I'm not sure. For banana bread with Conagra, maybe that's the...
I love those Ontario bananas.
And a teaser for tomorrow, you will be getting to see, those of you who are here for both days, the California Grain Campaign's agenda and progress in this direction of getting farmers market bakers to do something local and responsible for flour. Great. So let's stop in your storytelling and talk about that moment of deciding to use regional flour, stone ground organic, you couldn't just go to the distributor and say, I'll have this and this and this. What was the relationship building like?
It took a long time, and it still takes time. I was extremely lucky. Like first Naomi with the Red Fife, and then my dear friend Jeff Connell, who is here, introduced me to Patricia Hastings of CIPM Farm, and for many years, I got her flour. So that was a really lucky connection because there was nothing online. There was no information to be found. So we sort of stumbled into it and really lucked out, and things just fell into place. And then as the movement's grown, it's been easier to find, other farmers. And now I'm working with another farmer who's growing some einkorn for us, though his update last week was not so heartening. But, so that's been, it's getting easier for sure. Right? You can now find Red Fife in Whole Foods, milled by an Ontario farmer, and at some independent grocery stores. People are asking about stuff. There's a huge interest in all the heirloom grains. So it's been really heartening and great to see all the changes.
Yeah. So are you able now to use some standard distribution networks to help with your sourcing?
We still buy directly from the farmer. So in Ontario, what we found is the farmers are also the millers. There is a good independent miller, but we've just ended up dealing directly with the farmers. And the guy we have now, Peter Leahy of Maryland Organics, he's a very good miller. He does what we want. He will separate stuff out if we want to reincorporate later. So that's the route we've chosen. We use a distributor for other products, but the flour has always been directly from the farmer.
Now talk about the product choices of what you made according to the ingredients that you wanted to use.
So we make a lot of German-style rye breads, and then we do a lot of market baking. So as the baker from Boulangerie Merci La Vie was saying, I'm not going to work overnight, right? I'm 48 years old. Those days are done. So I do products that I can bake later in the afternoon that are still good the next day. So we do loads of cookies and bars and very simple sort of North American style. I've never been that interested in the fine patisserie. I like to eat it, not necessarily to make it. And the grain has just really dictated, I guess the grain has dictated everything, right? So like the buckwheat has a certain flavor. What is it going to go with? The Red Fife has a certain flavor. This year the baking quality is meh, so I'm going to, make muffins with it, or, you find a way to figure out how to use it. There was definitely a year where I got a lot of sprouted grain. That was really tricky, but you figure out how to use it, right? And you go from there.
Let's explain a little bit about what sprouted grain means to people.
Oh, sure. So it had rained a few days before the harvest, so the grain had actually sprouted, so it has crazy enzymatic activity and not really great gluten, and your falling numbers are just, it's not great for bread.
It's not as controllable,
No.
and it's already started to do its baking activity in the field, so it's not great. Talk a little bit more about your flavor decision making because I love watching on Instagram where you're going with your flavors.
Yeah, so at one point I broke down all the flours we were using, and we sort of had Red Fife is sort of cinnamony and sweet. Spelt is a little nuttier. Buckwheat is grassier. So instead of incorporating different spices and all the add-ins, it's how do you bring the grain forward and highlight that. And when you start talking about the grains as flavors, for us, it's also been a really big connection with our customers because it's like, oh, that whole grain hippie skippy baking. And it's like, no, try it. And on our farmers market table, the grain is the first item in the title, right? It's rye, whatever. It's a buckwheat brownie. It's emmer and blue corn, whatever. And people come over because they're intrigued and they don't know what it is. And everyone's like, are you gluten-free? I'm like, no, we would be gluten-full. But, give it a try. And you just start having these amazing conversations because people don't, most customers do not think of flour as flavor, right? That is your base to put flavor into. And I feel we are already starting with a beautiful product that the farmers worked exceptionally hard to grow, and then the miller or the farmer miller has milled it, and why would I toss out all the flavor components so I can receive a dead weight product?
Right, and so just to really establish that, the flavor in a flour is in the bran and the germ, and endosperm, which is white flour, doesn't have that. White flour only has the endosperm, and so you're relying on fermentation to build your flavors. But you have these opportunities with whole grain. Wait, sorry.
I can hear you.
We're just chatting here. You have this opportunity with whole grains to really fool around with flavor in a way that we didn't know about. It's pretty spectacular that this whole tradition. Let's go down that bunny hole a little bit. Since you don't have an obligation to French baking styles, and you do have experience with seeing a place like Germany where, even if it does have white flour sweets, there's always going to be a spelt loaf. There's always the rye loaves. How do you, as a progressive baker in North America, how do you think we can build a taste for whole grain?
Oh, a lot of sampling. I think as the grain movement is really become entrenched in the local food movement, people are now understanding grain as a regional product, right? Grain is not just grown in the prairies. It's not just grown in the American Midwest. You can look at older maps and see that grain was grown across North America. It's an essential crop. It's a good cover crop. So people are starting to see that. I think a lot of bakers are cluing in to that we are part of the local food movement. And as food writers start talking about this, there's wonderful millers like Nan, really out there pushing the message, right? So there is definitely a buzz in the air. So people might have heard it, maybe they haven't tasted it, but now their curiosity is piqued. And then people are also, all these crazy dietary, whatever you want to call it, there's still some room for heirloom grains and getting back to, I don't want to say basics, but people are looking for alternatives.
Right. Within the no's that are created by gluten phobia, there's room to explore something else. I used to be really angry, so I fell in love with flour just as the world fell out of love with flour, and I thought, God, this is horrible. But then Jonathan Bethany, who is a baker we should all adore, he convinced me. He said, well, in that no, there's the chance to change things. There's the opportunity to explore so many other yeses. And Jonathan now runs Selu Bakery in Washington, D.C. He did a wonderful interview with Jeremy, who does Eat This podcast, where I want everybody to listen to this, because Jonathan spoke about the necessity of retraining not just consumers, but retraining bakers because we're not used to handling whole grains at all. So this demands a different approach from day one. And Jonathan explored this approach really thoroughly at the Bread Lab, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. Yep. But he's just got this, I sort of wish Jonathan started a baking school rather than a bakery, because I want him to do that instruction. I want him to take the bull by the horns on the moment that we have right here. There's so many people who are turning to baking as a way to revive interpersonal connections all the way back to the field, backwards and forwards. And so that education piece, talk a little bit about your involvement with the Bread Lab and Jonathan.
Yeah, I have a long-time relationship with the Bread Lab, and Jonathan is a dear friend, and I'm Yeah, I love his bakery. So I would go there in the winter, and he and I would just spend the week screwing around, right? Like all rules were out the door. So we would make a whole grain bread, and then we say, oh, let's add some bran. You know, like just let's try this, let's push it. And he and I were on the same page, like we just didn't care if we failed. Right? So what can this do? Let's grind it like this. Let's scald this. Let's try this sourdough. Let's mix some grains. And then I brought a sweet component too, because Jonathan is just bread. So we were doing some different pastries in the lab, and just really mixing it up and having fun and just seeing where it led us. And when you walk into the bread lab and there is the wall of, over 200 types of grain that you could grind. And then you could walk out. This was winter, so there wasn't a lot growing, but you could walk out to the test fields, and then you could talk to one of the graduate students, like, what, you want to talk about barley? They could talk about barley for days. Then there's the guy trying to do the perennial wheats and the blue wheats, and let's try a blue wheat, and this one is kind of blue, this one is more purple. And I mean, it was just like your head just explodes, and it was an amazing opportunity to just have fun.
Such an imaginative way. That's great. And talk about your own teaching that you do during the grain gathering and...
Right, so I co-teach with Naomi, and the first year we went out to teach, I taught a cracker class, and I think we were the only whole grain workshop. And we just told Steve Jones, if you're gonna do this and you're growing all these wheats, it needs to be a whole grain conference. And so I'd say by the third year they were there, right? It's whole grain. And now you have, I'm drawing a blank on his name, Mark, the wonderful bagel maker, who is now doing whole grain sourdough bagels, rye bagels, just all different stuff. Like the conference has gone crazy. There was somebody nixtamalizing different grains, not corn, to make tortillas. People they took it and ran with it. And it's great. And again, like nobody cares about if they screw up, right? It's just like, let's have fun. And I think there's 2 or 3 different workshops on rye this year, right? Like that's 5 years ago, there were no workshops on rye.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great. So what are you going to be teaching there this year?
I took the easy way out, and I'm just doing cookies.
Great.
So, yeah.
Great. So tell me about your new steps in Evelyn's Crackers.
Sure. So for 10 years, we've been doing the crackers. Our business is half wholesale crackers, half farmers market baked goods. And just over the past 3 or 4 years, we've really been expanding our non-cracker line. And we recently lost our facility because Toronto is undergoing a huge gentrification. And so our building sold for way too much money, and the new owner ended our lease. And so we spent about 6 months looking for a new space, and everything is really prohibitively expensive. And then we looked at our books and realized our best customer has this amazing independent grocery store in Kensington Market, and he has baking space, and he had been talking about putting a mill in. And I was like, but you can't put a mill in because you don't, who's gonna run the mill, right? So we have joined up with him, so now we are baking out of a very tiny baking space, but we're building out the front of the store to get a new American stone mill, which is ordered, yay. And we're putting in a bread oven, and it's gonna be right in the front of the store, glassed in, so completely on display. So the goal is Kensington Market gets a ton of foot traffic, so it's like people will start asking questions, right? Because they're gonna see the mill, and then they're gonna see the bread. So
that's so important, the visibility to create questions and conversations.
Yeah. And we're gonna mill, we're gonna sell the grains, right? Because I think you and I probably gave the same keynote about the importance
opposite coast
of milling. Milling is the key to this movement, right? People and home bakers, and so we're gonna be appealing to home bakers who are really, really pushing the envelope.
Home bakers are really excited because, as I've observed this local grain economy take hold in different spots, bakeries that are already existing have a really hard time adapting ideologically and financially to a different base product. Home bakers, however, are applying great love and force to our flour, and it's a great thing to seize. Will you have teaching capacity at this?
Yes, in the back of the store, we hope to do some workshops. We'll see. We're taking the long view. We'll see how it all unfolds, but I think within 2 months we should have it built out and hopefully up and running.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we're really excited. Thank
Are
you.
you? No, thank you. Are you running into any difficulties with the approval process for running a mill facility?
Not yet. I've heard lots
I hope I'm not cursing it by bringing this up.
Not yet. We're just going to do it. It's the whole easier to ask for forgiveness.
Yep.
And this store has been established for a long time, so he has a great record with the health department.
Great.
Everything is up to code. I think the difficulty we're going to run into is if I want to keep the completely Ontario grain sourcing, is the farmers I work with now don't test the grain.
Ooh.
So we've got to figure that out. We've got to figure out how to get them access to different seeds. It's really difficult. I'm talking to this farmer about growing different kinds of wheat, and he's struggling to get the seeds. So
that's because of the varieties you're asking for and they don't exist? Or is it the
I'm not
Canadian
sure.
seed system?
I think it's the Canadian seed system. I believe you could
Chris
speak to
could,
this.
yeah.
And part of it is, that's another long game, is it's taking 8 years to build up seed supply, right? So he could get a handful of really anything, but then how many years do we have to wait till it's...
Right.
So it's tricky, and for me it's watching what's going on south of the border. I'm just dying as all these, backdoor bread. Jim there in Rhode Island. He's like, oh, here's my, black emmer, and here's my einkorn, and here's my redeemer. And I'm like,
there's baker envy up and down the internet.
Serious. So we'll get there. We will definitely get there, but there's definitely a lot of stumbling blocks. And the farmers, some of them are gonna need to up their game. And that's because if we're not mixing it with other grains, right? So
not relying on blending to get the characteristics that anyone needs to bake. So that's always a challenge. What's the timeline here? Because I neglected to bring a watch.
I don't know. I think we're pretty good.
Okay. So there's so many. Did you ever imagine that you would have a future in grains as you looked upon food?
I really thought I was going to be a chef.
Yeah? But you're sort of a chef of grains because it's this new approach that you have to take. It has that kind of process where you're meeting an ingredient where it's at rather than meeting its number on the bag.
Yeah, and I feel really lucky that certain things have fallen into place. I feel really lucky that I can have a job where I can keep my idealism about things, and I feel really lucky to engage with these farmers and be part of a really great local food community, and then to engage with our customers. Our customers are so supportive and just trust us to kind of lead them on this journey. And we have lots of people who swore that they could not eat gluten, and they are buying bread every week. They are buying crackers. They are buying baked goods. They are starting to bake themselves. We're super lucky.
That's great. Do you only do sourdough leavening?
Yes.
And describe to us what people might sample on any given day. What is your sampling look like?
I have 2 kinds of rye breads. One is often mixed with emmer or spelt, all German style. I'll do a porridge bread. I'm doing just a straight up emmer loaf right now. We have 4 kinds of crackers, from the digestive style to more lavash, and I probably have about 12 different baked goods. So madeleines, cookies, brownies, blondies. We're doing a quick whole grain spelt puff pastry, so sweet and savory. But just it's kind of like whatever. What do I feel like? What pans do I have? What's at the market now that things are finally coming in? Thank God. You know, and we freeze and process loads of fruit and veggies all summer long.
That's great.
Yeah.
As your business has grown, how has the dialogue matured or grown between you and the customers?
Well, now that there's this trust, they're just much more open to trying things, and they're no longer afraid. They just ask, like, I still get, what is Emmer? I still get, what is Red Fife? But now maybe somebody in line will be like, oh, Red Fife is, you know, blah, 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 blah. And, right, that's great. So, and there's just, there's actually more of a dialogue. You know, and even my mom down in the States will send me articles of, you know, stuff in Bon Appetit where they're talking about different grains, right? So it's like it's there, it's out there, it's coming, and it's really good to see.
Is there anything that you would like to ask of the world to accelerate your vision?
That we all need to remember that grains have been with us for a really long time, and that they are an essential part of our diet. And the fear of food is really disheartening. And I just hope that we can all figure out how to move past that.
Yeah, I think, you know, people always ask me, I wrote a book, there's like 10 words about non-gluten stuff, but 90% of my questions are about gluten-free. And I really think, especially in America, that it's about fear.
Yeah.
We abandon traditions, but we still need to gather around food. And I think fear has become the thing that binds us, because we still have to congregate. It's this really intimate thing we're doing, putting food into your mouth in public and taking something from each other. We should be connecting around it, but fear is the larger part of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and especially at a farmer's market, because you do attract a lot of people with very specific food needs and very specific food ideas. So we're constantly getting the gluten-free question. We're constantly getting, is the wheat GMO question. We're getting the, oh, but I don't eat modern wheat. You know, so there's just a lot of unknowns, and people tend to latch on to things, and it's a lot of hand-holding, and that's not really my strength.
Would you guys like to ask a question of Dawn? Anybody have a question? You want to go over to the
Hi, you spoke earlier about the bread lab and working with like graduate students and like that kind of research and development. So I wondered for you, what's the role of or what's the dialogue you have with food researchers within universities and academia, and what role do you see between like you as an established baker working and creating kind of links between academia and food?
So in the U.S., with the land-grant universities and all the agricultural research stations that they have, I think it's extremely important. Their role is to help farmers make a profit, right? And the bread lab, for the most part, they don't believe in patents, right? So they're growing seed that's going to suit the area where they are. And they do believe in whole grain, and they do believe in sustainable and organic methods. And so they're sort of taking a different path, like they don't have a grant from Monsanto or ADM. So I think they're essential. So these guys are creating a seed supply that's open to the public, and I know they've sold some seed to farmers and some to millers, and they have a long way to go, but I think universities play a huge role, because if we leave it up to corporations, we're all going to be eating one kind of wheat.
But you work with, like, for example, I have a background in processing and engineering. Sorry. So what link do you see? Because, like, we're in similar fields, but just from different backgrounds. So what kind of synergies do you see for somebody like me? Because baking is a science in itself. Like a lot of people that I work with wouldn't understand the complexity of baking. But what are those synergies that can be like bridged?
Let me see if I can answer that. So I think working with the grad students, a lot of them have become really good bakers because they're trying to understand what they're growing, right? So on one hand, they're dealing with the farmer and all the technicalities of growing this and how to deal with climate change. And then they're also very aware of a flavor component. So when they work with the baker, they can see the end result. So they're sort of they're a good link, right, between the people growing the food and the people processing the food. And with the money that the university has, they can do a lot of research that's not profitable because that's not their bottom line. So I think they can take risks and grow interesting things and do things that might not pay off. The guy doing the perennial wheat project, who knows if that's ever going to work, right? There are so many issues with perennial wheat, right? The different size seeds heads, the constant, the long maturing process, like, half the plant is ready, half the plant isn't, but they have the time and the space to explore that possibility because they're not under a deadline and it's not a bunch of shareholders wanting their money. So I think the universities are essential. And I'm not going to go out and get a PhD, so.
And I can see a little bit of linkages that maybe you're like, so the Culinary Breeding Network, the whole Pacific Northwest has a ton going on. So Lane Selman is a woman who works in extension at OSU, and she started something called the Culinary Breeding Network that bridges the gap between farmers and chefs and researchers. And so that is not just grains, but vegetable growers all the way through, and that is a linkage, creating a variety showcase as a way to highlight the works, but also to bring chefs to the field and to the lab all the way through, keep everybody in that dialogue. Andrew Ross is the cereal scientist at OSU. He's an incredible asset to people looking at regional grains. Asheville and the whole state of North Carolina has a lot of local grain lookings at. UVM has great resources dedicated to grains. University of Maine also does, and Cornell. Those are the ones that I know of. Champaign-Urbana has really good stuff. So there's lots of places where it's growing up, but it's a slow, because it's been slow to hit local tables because of all these barriers all along the way. It's just starting to become part of the research thing. But if you go to a field day, you get to see these ag professionals who are really excited. Okay, let's get a malt barley that works for regional growers. It's happening.
It's a question for both of you, actually. We're in a room full of people who are mostly professional bakers or people who work within grain. So for the amateur, the truly home baker, what are the impediments to getting people to baking with whole grains and local grains? And what are the ways in which both of you think that those impediments can be removed?
I think access, right? Finding them. There's stuff online. There's some things at farmers markets, but it's hard. You're not going to go to the store and find einkorn, right? You have to live in you have to live in LA. I know in Canada there's Eat Grain. You can order great things online. So you have to be willing to to work for it, right? And search it out, and hopefully that will gradually broaden. And hopefully as more professional bakers start using these grains, then maybe they'll also sell some to the public, right?
Right. So and I think that within the home, it's the mental barrier first to baking. It breaks my heart. I remember one grower I know who said his mixes sold better than anything else, and I thought, oh, but you got to turn that around, because that's the opportunity. If you can invite someone in on a mix and then they can see, oh, it's really easy. Of course, pancakes are my national dish. So, pancakes are wicked easy. Anybody can make a pancake, and any flour can make a pancake. So in terms of any kind of variability that people are going to face, getting just everyone making a pancake would do wonders for bringing back grains.
Hi. I think this is an eco-political question I have. The title of this panel is that whole grain, it's our duty. So what's at stake? What do we achieve if we...
The environment.
Yeah? But can we go into that a little bit?
I mean, sure. Growing grain organically is a good thing to do, right? Conventional grain is sprayed with a lot of shit. The silos are sprayed. The train cars are sprayed. And then if you want to... For me, local bakery means using local ingredients as much as I can, right? And if I can source, I'm lucky to be able to source local grain, right? So I'm contributing to the economy. We pay a lot more for our flour. And there's a whole, one of the things I'm struggling with is the whole elitism issue, because our products are not cheap. And I don't believe that food should be cheap, but that doesn't answer the question of, especially in a city where you have very underserved populations, how do they have access, right? So there's a lot of disparity, a lot of inequality. It's something I struggle with. So I'm not sure how to answer that question, but if you talk to farmers, one of our best friends is a biodynamic grain grower in the prairies, and one of the reasons, and he was a conventional farmer in Ontario, and he got really sick. And then he switched and became biodynamic, and now he's out in Saskatchewan growing, wonderful things biodynamically. And when you talk to him about his farm and going out and seeing the amphibians in the stream and the butterflies and the birds, and he's really at peace. And that's food is a great thing, and let's not forget that there's somebody's toil behind that food, and we need to preserve farmland. And yeah, right. And I have a kid, so what are we leaving for her?
Yeah. And yes to all that, and then on a different, more metaphoric level, I really feel like the whole grain is can be used as a metaphor for the necessity of us democratizing socially. My day job, writing is a crime that doesn't pay. So I run a soup kitchen and food pantry. And I get to see the product of cheap flour. The most available food that I get is sweets and bread. There's so much of that. And I'm serving it to impoverished people who are already vulnerable to the chronic diseases that a refined diet invites. So I know there's a bridge more than me between these worlds. Right now, it's so hard to create the bridge because it is more expensive. There's no government subsidies for transitioning to organics. But I keep dreaming up ways. What if we could do a muffin mix that would be the byproducts of small mills? And then, I can use those and serve those. To circle back, the idea is it's a whole grain, and the plant needs the whole grain to grow. We all need each other to grow. Bread reminds us of that. Bread is an example of cooperation being required to get us where we are, to all these beautiful technologies that allow us to forget each other. So can we try to use the entire grain, or if we're not going to use the whole grain, figure out ways to support everyone in the supply chain and everyone on the consuming chain, too.
I have a question. I'm going to speak loudly if that's okay. So I work in food security, I work with food banks and things like that. I think you guys bring up a really interesting point on people who can afford to buy something better. So I was wondering, what is one barrier and one encouraging thing you guys have seen working in that? I mean, you're at farmers markets, you see things every day. I love what you're doing. Also, you're working in a food pantry. What is? Excuse-moi, pardon, but what is one thing that has helped? What do you find encouraging in that conversation of bringing whole grains
that have a value to people who can't afford it? Maybe working with nonprofits or whatever, but what is one thing that's been encouraging through that process?
One is never really a good number for me, but so Jonathan at Selu Bakery gives a discount or a significant discount to anyone who's on food stamps, I believe, some kind of incentive. So that right there. And then in my own work, I can serve whole grain pancakes wicked easy. So that's beautiful. One of the kinds of pancakes that I serve is Maine Grains donates its first minute of milling each day where they're setting the stones. They call it the run of the mill, and it's not good for baking bread, but it's good for other stuff. So, you know, they donate it to schools and places like this. And take a look at Camas Country Mill. They've done great ways of placing whole grains in schools. New York State has an initiative to get to get local sourcing, and whole grains will be a way there.
Yeah, we've been approached by some government programs for school snacks, but even when we take out any profit, but just to cover our costs, it's still 3 times what they want to pay. So that's been discouraging. But from my time back in the States, so there's no food stamps here, but in the States there's food stamps. And some individual states have taken where the food stamps are worth twice their value at a farmer's market. And so one of our farmers markets is at a nonprofit called The Stop, and I'm hoping that they somehow figure something out, because they serve a lot of people in need, but yet they're somehow not bridging the gap between their food kitchens and the market, right? So hopefully something will, because they do a lot of advocacy, they do a lot of great work, but they're not viewing the market as an essential part of that. And so maybe that will change.
I think the value has to grow together in terms of government recognizing it, consumers recognizing it, and policy has to encourage that too, right?
Yes.
Instead of asking for a low price from artisans and anyone who makes food, to ask to value that and see it as preventative medicine paying out in the long term.
Well, you save so much money in the long run, right? When people eat better. Yeah. And so, the policymakers need to get on board. So, with the election that just happened in Ontario?
I'm sorry.
See what happens.
Thank you.
I'm going to put a tiny plug in for The Stop, because they are one of Canada's many gifts to America. They do they were so successful at transforming food banking that the Food Centers Canada is an entire organization that is transforming food banks, and they had a month-long course. Half of the participants were American food banks who were, we were just talking with our peers trying to figure out ways to get healthier food into the food banking system. So thank you all. I have badges and would be happy to give you them, all my new ambassadors. And thank you, Dawn, for sharing your story.